Thank you for joining us for another episode of Channel Revelations. I'm Ethan Fox, and I'm here with Micheila Sheldan. And today we'll be spending the next couple of hours talking about ancient civilizations and valuable things that we can learn from them. And as I always say, Micheila is a trance channel, so we'll be speaking directly to the guides, but just so her conscious mind doesn't interfere with the information anyway, I don't discuss the topics or the questions with her beforehand. So also, these shows are a series, so if you have any questions, we may have answered them in previous shows. You may have to go back to the first Channel Revelations and watch them all the way through, since it's an ongoing storyline that we're talking about in every show. So whenever you're ready, we can start.
All right. Okay.
Who we're speaking with today?
We are the Council of Light. As always, we are pleased and prepared to answer any questions that you have, also calling upon those who may be necessary to join us to clarify any points.
In previous conversations, we have spent time discussing the Anunnaki and the Naga and their differences and interactions with human beings. And we also touched in the previous show on the architectural differences and how they built their sites and their cities and their homes and temples and things like that. And today I want to focus primarily on the architecture and the architectural differences. So to start, I'd like to talk about, like in the Caucasus Mountains of Russia, they discovered a number of dolmens in that area that they dated from 10 to 25,000 years old. Now, dolmens are a little bit different from many of the structures we've discussed in previous conversations in that they're very simplistic designs. They are four-sided, and the stones tend to be very large in size. So it isn't something that your average human being would be able to lift and put into place. So they're typically four-sided with a flat roof, and they're very simple designs, no hieroglyphics or markings or artistry, very basic. And many of them will have perfectly circular doorways to enter. So not the kind of thing you would think that a human being would enter through. Although some of the other ones do have rough cutouts of a regular human-sized doorway. So they vary, but what's common about all dolmens is that they tend to just look like somebody put together four flat stones with a flat roof, although some are very precisely cut. And so it appears that some sort of technological, either inner or outer technology was used to make them. I'm curious if these were primarily reptilian-built structures or Anunnaki or something else.
Well, not necessarily either, because you must keep in mind that they were not the only races present on Earth at this time. And of course, there was the enormity of portals in various locations throughout the globe that had been open to facilitate the ongoing, we'll say, hybridization of various races who were here, in addition to the desire to interface with human beings at the time. And there were a variety of different reasons for this. The main difference in the structures that you're explaining right now versus the ones that we have spoken of previously has to do more with a container type of structure in which there is an ability to fashion a portal. Now, we've spoken of portals a bit in our various discussions, but we want to explain that portals are extremely complex in their manifestation and organization. There are portals that exist within the galactic universe between various grid points. There are portals that also have obviously taken shape within and upon the Earth. And there are portals that exist within your own energy field, even within your bodies. These are typically areas in which multidimensional communication is facilitated. Yet there were some on planet Earth that understood how to bypass the original portals that many had constructed pyramids or temples around. In other words, they wanted to arrive on Earth in order to research, perhaps, or to interface with a segment of the population, or even have access to certain resources. But in order to come through some of the portals that were present on the planet at the time, they would have had to hybridize themselves, which sometimes meant some infinite form of hybridization that could not be returned to the original source. In other words, some beings found it very difficult to move through a portal to the earth, to hybridize and be a part of the experience here, and then to travel back and to find themselves in the form in which they had originated. So there were many ET races at the time who would have fashioned a structure like this, not necessarily in a physical way, but using light or a ship in order to move, not necessarily the stones in their original form, but to move the earth in such a way that the stone would find the perfect junction between the intergalactic universe, or a dimension in which the ETs that were present wanted to come through, and the elements of Earth themselves. So what you're seeing in the exact cuts isn't necessarily done using a physical tool, nor a template as we've previously described. These were typically moved in relationship to energy fields that were facilitated through the plasma ships that these beings would have arrived on. They had the ability to carve intricate designs if they wanted, but this was not necessary because these were not areas that were typically being utilized for healing, for example, nor were they storing important records. They weren't necessarily intended to be utilized by humans at all. They were, in fact, a very valuable entry point for those who wished to come to Earth.
So now some of them appear very crude in design, meaning the stones they don't appear to have been cut very precisely. They just look like rough stones that were just thrown together. So why would you design a portal in such a crude way? I would imagine portal technology would have to be more precise, wouldn't it?
Well, it had little to do with the actual stone or the cuts of the stone, and more to do with creating a protective field around an energetic, we'll say, program or signature that they had put into place.
So the stones didn't serve a purpose of creating the portal themselves. It was the technology. They were housing some sort of vibratory technology then.
That is correct, yes.
I see. And what purpose do the stones serve then? Was it like an insulator of the technology, or what was the point?
Not in all cases, although we agree that this could have been a part of their design in some cases. More so, these were markers, not because those with advanced technology couldn't have found their way to precise locations within the earth, but because once they arrived here, they would often become a bit disoriented as to their, we'll say, access point. It is very much like if you were to time travel from the earth into a space between, and a part of you remembered that you were human, but it was very difficult to understand exactly where you were in the universe, knowing, of course, that a part of you has catapulted beyond. This would often happen with certain races of beings because they were not necessarily structured in the same way that hybrids and gods and those we have been speaking of had come to evolve as. They were coming to a planet, a new planet in their experience at a time when it was even somewhat still fresh and new. So to arrive here in a portal that they had constructed, it did require some physical, we'll say, marking or geographic divination of where it might reside on the earth. Yet keep in mind, of course, that in using a natural earth element like stone, there is always the consideration of resonance. So in energetic technologies or any type of frequency field that is being created, it is very common to see natural earth elements being the outer edges or protective barrier of that field, because within it the frequency will be multiplied, because it is an earth portal that you are actually working with. In other words, earth energy is being channeled and somehow utilized to create a quantum field. And within that quantum field, the barrier or the protection of it is somewhat amplifying it or holding it in place.
If these beings are coming to Earth in intergalactic ships and they've arrived here, what purpose does the portal on Earth serve if they were already here to begin with?
Well, these portals were not necessarily for communication or to arrive on the planet. Portals, they are they're capable, let's say, of holding a frequency that is very important to sustain a being once they have arrived here. In other words, a portal can be designed to facilitate any type of dimensional experience. To give you a very simplistic example, if there were seventh dimensional beings that wanted to come to Earth that were not able necessarily to use earthly portals in the way they were fashioned, they might create their own portal that would hold a seventh dimensional energy, not because they needed it to enter the atmosphere, so much as it would help sustain them once they arrived. They would be able to shapeshift depending upon their form or to hybridize if it was their choice. But the portal would allow them to find comfort in some very specific way, whether it was to transmit between the Earth and their star planet, or to somehow nourish themselves in a way that they were not sure they would be able to access on the Earth plane. Remember, many of the beings that came to Earth, they were not physically focused. They did not require the same type of sustenance that human beings did. They were used to running on light or nourishing themselves using plasma, for example. So in anticipation of arriving here, they may have been housing some type of energy field that contained all of the recipe of what they would need, from the range of information to nourishment, all the way through to communication to support them while they remained here.
Using your example of seventh dimensional beings using these dolmens as portals, if a seventh dimensional being was using these dolmens as a portal, did they have to remain inside of that container, that four-sided with a flat roof structure, or could they leave it?
It would depend upon the being and their purpose for coming, as well as their decision to hybridize. But what we can say is in many circumstances, this was the case. Think of it somewhat like a comfort zone and a safety zone to manage a great deal of uncertainty coming to a planet in which very little was known. There were times, however, where it was found that an interdimensional being that was seventh dimensional was able to sustain its energy beyond the use of a facility like this, but may return to it in order to rejuvenate themselves or to harmonize their energy. It was not unusual, of course, for hybrid beings to find themselves in very physically dense realities in which it was hard to sustain the harmony and the balance of their vibration. Many of these containers, we'll call them, or even portal technologies, had the ability to transmit very potent frequencies that would support their stay on Earth for longer periods of time.
In any way, is this similar in function anyway, from a mechanical standpoint, to the handbags that we see many of the ancients carrying around?
They are, yet not as complex, even though portal technology, as we mentioned, can be complex in its explanation. Many of these handbags were so meticulously tailor-suited to the individual being and race that if you were to look inside of them, they might seem completely unique from another. Yet the premise was very similar. Yes, we will agree that it is very similar in its orientation to the handbags, but using, we'll say, drawing more of an earth vibration and using it technologically to mimic something from beyond the earth.
But the similarity would be that, similar to the handbags, the dolmens provided these beings a means to be on Earth in some form while still bringing forth some of the higher elements of themselves, higher dimensional aspects of themselves into this reality so they could function here. Is that what the purpose was?
In some cases, yes, although we would attribute what you are saying more to the handbags themselves than the dolmens, because these were a bit more archaic, we'll say, in their presentation. They weren't necessarily focused so much on constant contact with their home planet. Sometimes they were mimicking a moment in time in which the beings could step back in and remember the truth of who they were, or channel energy from their structure, their original structure, to help sustain them in the hybridized form that they had chosen. This is, we think, the primary difference.
And we don't often talk about seventh dimensional beings in our conversations. So can you enlighten me as to what is a seventh dimensional consciousness? Is there a particular collective of beings that we already are familiar with, or is it something totally different?
Well, the seventh dimension is massive, and the seventh dimension does exist here on planet Earth. There is not only one race that has reached the seventh dimension. There are hundreds of thousands of races throughout the universe who have chosen the seventh dimension to manifest in. Yet it is quite different than what you may recognize on Earth. Remember, each dimension is expanding access to information, and information is also light. So as you move upward through dimensions, you are able to access more light, which is also information, through which you are able to choose what form you manifest in. Now, in the fifth dimension, there are shapeshifters, even though the fifth dimension on Earth hasn't necessarily reached that point in its, we'll say, vibrational manifestation, because every dimension is an evolutionary container through which the beings that exist are learning how to work with it as they are daily interacting with themselves and many others. In the seventh dimension, many beings choose to move between various states of form and light. However, the physical form that they may present in is far more plasmic, we might say, than what human beings exist in today. And that is the main difference that we see in the seventh dimension versus those below it. Plasma has become extended and operates to its fullest degree, meaning a soul has the ability to immediately receive contact or information from beyond the veil. And they are able to integrate it also in a very expedited fashion. Where in your reality, it may take a little time or lag in time space to receive something from your plasma, which is cosmic in nature, and understand how to work with it in a physical reality. Seventh dimensional beings are very adept at this. They're able to time travel very efficiently. They're able to use their plasma very efficiently, yet they still do maintain some semblance of individuality and identity. So as we go up from the seventh dimension, we see beings who are somewhat losing that sense of individuality or having to have a separate ego. There is more unity from a collective experience where it's no longer necessary to have an individual reality that is evolving you because the entire collective is evolving together. It's not a better choice necessarily, even though many souls would believe it is. It's just a different choice. So seventh dimensional beings can present themselves very much like humans. At the same time, we might say they are so tuned in to their supersensory abilities that they are able to transcend their physical nature very quickly if they choose.
Is you mentioned ego. So is ego a factor of dimension 1 through 7, but doesn't continue from 8 beyond?
Varying levels of ego exist in every dimension, but manifest differently dependent upon the degree of collective energy that you have decided to be a part of. So even in the 12th dimension, we know there are beings who are exploring the idea of ego, but they are doing so not to the detriment of self or another. This is perhaps the biggest difference, is in the 12th dimension, there is always an immediate consideration or understanding of what everyone else in the collective requires in order to go to the next dimensional level or evolutionary marker in their journey. So while there is an understanding that someone in a collective reality is not necessarily holding a separate identity, there's a need to understand how the whole works as one. And there is, we'll say, individual perception of that, meaning that in a 12th dimension, even though it is collective, there are fragments of the whole that are unifying through the idea that they are all perceiving something unique. It is just that that perception does not hold them back in the way it does in lower dimensions, and especially here on planet Earth. But in the seventh dimension, for example, ego isn't looked at as something negative. Again, there is still an understanding that each individual that has chosen a seventh dimensional form is very importantly contributing to a collective reality. And they cherish more so what it is unique about them that is purposeful in that contribution. So the idea of identity in a seventh dimensional being becomes a bit more fluid. There's no need to hold on so tightly to certain belief systems or ideals about the self. A soul is always exploring what the other can offer to help them grow. And this is why the seventh dimension, we think, is a very ascendant place to be. Beings will choose to be in the seventh dimension for many, many incarnations, even simultaneous to each other, because they want so desperately to study the dichotomy of individuality and collective energy is simultaneous to each other. It is a experience that is hard for us to even explain to those of you who are in physical bodies, because it's somewhat mystical in its presentation. You speak a great deal oftentimes in these transmissions about consciousness and being able to observe yourself in a specific reality, even feeling something and having an experience of the feeling. This is truly a seventh dimensional type of activity that becomes more natural in that state, where the observation is simply second nature. It's not something that has to be efforted at. In other words, it's something that a soul has already learned as it's come up through the dimensions beneath and is now able to put into some semblance of physical expression.
The collective nature you mentioned that happens to the ego in the 12th dimensional experience versus the 7th, is that something that cuts off at the 7th? And so from 8 to 12, we're moving more toward the collective nature?
Well, you can certainly look at it this way. As you move through dimensions, you are losing more of the egoic perception of self, and you are expanding more into a unified field. And even as you move between this reality and the next, leaving this incarnation behind, what is happening is you're losing your semblance of individuality and ego. There is a moment when your soul has transitioned beyond the body where it hesitates because it's holding on in resistance to what it knew before and who it knew itself to be, while it's feeling all of that begin to slip away. So there truly is a value in transitioning between dimensions, in letting go or surrendering some of the things that your soul has held on so tightly to in many lifetimes, not only here on earth, but in lower dimensions. But certainly, yes, the access to light allows a soul to perceive itself beyond the veil of separation. And that is the true difference between each dimension.
And so the description of light that you're using here is something that only takes place after the 7th dimension.
Well, you have the ability here on planet Earth, regardless of what dimension your timelines are in, to access as much light as you choose. So we want to make it very clear that dimensions are simply organizational containers in which souls that are choosing a specific reality find themselves. But to have incarnated here on planet Earth does not preclude you, in other words, from entering that seventh dimension. The problem is you are not a part of a collective that is also desiring to do the same. And that will always be a contributing factor to your ability to move solidly into another dimension while you're still here on a planet that is accessing one or another. So yes, we agree with what you're saying. At the same time, it's important for us to help everyone remember that they are all multidimensional beings and within themselves have the ability to choose whatever dimension they wish to explore. It is just holding that dimension and being able to create in it as a physical being would be quite difficult from where you stand today.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to understand is you use the term plasma to describe the 7th dimensional being's experience, and then you use the term light to describe a collective expression of ego, such as the 12th dimension, and alluded to that more access to light gives you the ability to experience things in a collective way. So I'm trying to understand, what is the difference between plasma and light, and is plasma something that we experience up to the 7th dimension, including the 3rd to 5th, which we are in now, and that after the 7th we move toward light, and light is something different from plasma as you're describing?
Well, it is simply how your plasma chooses to manifest. So we will explain the difference in a moment, but we want you to imagine that right now, your physical body is made of light that is vibrating at a speed that is causing your material body to transform. So each day, when you awaken, as you take a look in the mirror, every belief system you have about the physical body is pulling it together through light in order to present itself in the world as it is. So light is information. It's universe, it's godlike energy that has assumed a specific form and taken on a specific vibration. So when we say you're accessing more of your light, it means that your vibration has speeded up enough or accelerated enough to perhaps no longer require any expression of material. And that isn't of detriment or of greater service. We know that some on planet Earth would choose, if they were able, to leave the body behind and to manifest only in light. But every reality has its advantages and disadvantages. Right now, your free will is expressing through your individual identity, and that is very revered throughout the universe, because those that are in a collective vibration aren't necessarily living a unified and collective reality through free will. They are considering everyone else in their decision. And certainly that's benefiting the whole. At the same time, it's not allowing them to creatively express individually. So light is what you are. It is just that sometimes in a dense physical reality, the souls that exist there forget that their light is accessible to them. And plasma is what makes this possible. So we want to bring in first the concept of a light body, and then we'll speak about plasma and infuse these two definitions in a way that might make sense. As physical as you are made of light, and you also have a light body which generates itself beyond the physical earth. Your light body is interdimensional and multigalactic. It is always having a sentient experience, even when you're tuned into the physical plane. So if you were to take a walk in the park tomorrow, you would be having a present physical experience of nature and other human beings on the path and animals that were there. You would feel the temperature and the breeze, and you would notice the direction of the wind. At the same time, simultaneous to your physical experience, your light body is taking in a completely different landscape. It is communing with the various non-physical beings that exist in the forest, the fairies, for example, and the gnomes. It may even be traveling beyond the earth to access something that is necessary for your soul to ascend. But both of these components, your conscious mind and what your light body brings in, are brought together through plasma. Now, in a physical sense, you have plasma within your cells and within your body. But more so, we are speaking of the plasma that exists within your energetic field. It is an intangible type of technology that works in concert with the light body to send it beyond this reality and to have a time-traveled experience. Now, the problem with being a physical being is that the light body and the physical body have been at such different time-space realities, vibrational speeds and dimensions, that it's been difficult to consciously recognize where the two meet, or where the information of the light body can be helpful to a physical soul. It's as if the light body's information goes to waste. But the more you accentuate plasma, the more that information becomes understood. And the question we know might be, how does plasma become activated? Well, on a physical plane, the meditative practices that you do are growing your plasmic field. And as your plasmic field grows, it's capturing all of that light, energy, and information and storing it for you in a very valuable way, in a prioritized way, such that the second you need it, it is made available. This is called claircognizance, or knowing. Those who have immediate downloads or knowings are working with their plasma to retrieve light in a very quick speed that accentuates their ability to integrate it on a physical plane. Now, what we've just described, it changes as you move through dimensions. You always have a light body, you always have plasma. But what begins to happen is the less material you hold, the more that plasma and light body becomes the primary part of your technology, where there's far more access beyond the reality that is physical and more into the non-physical, or the whole of the universe. And it is somewhat like peeling away an onion. Every time you peel a layer, the onion gets smaller and smaller and smaller. There's less physical density to hold the light body or the plasma to form. And in so doing, it's free to go wherever it desires. And this is what forms collective energy. Because if we don't have an individual body to associate with, and nothing's holding us to a physical planet, we have no need to individualize or distinguish ourselves from anything else. We find ourselves flowing with whatever the collective requires. And that's ultimately the best definition that we can give you of the 12th dimension, where souls have lost, they've peeled away every bit of that onion to the point where there is no longer a reason to hold back the light body and the plasma, and it begins to coalesce with the light body and the plasma of everyone else. And then there is a collective experience that becomes born, and everyone is communicating simultaneously. There is no time or no need to distinguish between a question and an answer. It all comes immediately. So what we are saying when we're referring to accessing light is perhaps accessing those abilities, but in your own way, in the way that you are able to on planet Earth, not like any other being in the universe.
Are there specific kinds of civilizations or collectives or races that exist in the seventh dimension? Or are there even human beings that are having seventh dimensional experiences, or within a collective of human beings that are seventh dimensional, whether on Earth or on other planets?
As it stands today, we do see human beings that are accessing the seventh dimension, but as we mentioned, cannot hold a seventh dimensional reality in full in their physical lives. And also, because of the amount of physical density that they have chosen to manifest in, they are not collectively creating with others in the seventh dimension. So while the seventh dimension is accessible on planet Earth, and it does exist, and human beings are able to access it individually, there's no semblance of collective energy on the Earth in terms of the human race at the current moment. It does not mean that there are not seventh dimensional beings here functioning collectively from other planets. There certainly are. And the one that we can most importantly bring to this discussion is the Pleiadians. Now, there are many others, but we want to spotlight the Pleiadians because the seventh dimensional Pleiadians have been here for a very long time, and some of them shapeshift into human form. They are aware that they are Pleiadian and not human, but have assumed certain roles here in order to assist the ascension timeline. And they have the telepathic ability to intersect with every other seventh dimensional Pleiadian that is also here at the same time in the same form. What is interesting about this is there are also seventh dimensional Pleiadians that exist in that star system, not on planet Earth at all. And they are still in contact and able to evolve right along with the Pleiadians who are here. So some ET races, will say, have taken such a great interest in supporting human healing and the reestablishment of your original divine blueprint and evolutionary path that they volunteered to come and take human roles in that timeline in such a way that they are seen in a human form, but not necessarily understood as Pleiadian.
Quite often when we've discussed the Pleiadians in the past, you've channeled ninth, or this channel has brought in ninth dimensional Pleiadians, for example, and I assume there are some in the 12th dimension as well. So if there are also seventh dimensional Pleiadians in the Pleiades, I assume, and on Earth, then can a seventh dimensional Pleiadian interact with a 12th dimensional Pleiadian or a ninth dimensional Pleiadian, or are those dimensions too far apart?
Well, in the Pleiades star system, the multi-dimensions work a bit differently than they do here on Earth. Right now, within humanity, you are having a very difficult time intersecting with beings who exist in your same dimension or within your same level of consciousness. And that is somewhat by design. It's not for you to suffer necessarily, but there has been a bit of a lag time in moving the whole of the planet together as one. And because of that, human beings are stationed, we might say, in certain geographic areas of the earth where they have chosen to be either a conduit for incoming intel and information or healing, or they are meant to influence others through their consciousness. In Pleiades, the star system has evolved and advanced much further than the Earth. And you must keep in mind it's much older as well than the Earth and humanity. Now, the stars in Pleiades, they tend to organize themselves around dimension. So you do find that certain stars within Pleiades tend to hold a certain dimension, and the beings who are choosing that dimension reside there. They live communally. There is, however, still a great deal of interchange and sharing of resource between these various dimensions. Now, keep in mind all of the definitions we have just given you about the seventh dimension, plasma, and the light body. Pleiadians are very adept at moving between dimensions and having experiences with those of their same race in other dimensions because they have understood and learned the technology and how to access it and how to utilize it. And you may wonder, why then would Pleiadians choose to stay in the seventh dimension when they have access to those in the 12th that could assist them in ascending? Well, remember, these decisions aren't necessarily made in the same incarnation in which the dimension that is chosen is being explored. So there are many Pleiadians who are at great peace and of great joy to continue to choose a seventh dimensional perspective, even though they know they have the opportunity, if they choose, to move between various dimensions and to gain that wisdom. And they do, applying it individually within their own collective. Also, we want to point out that the Pleiades is a very open star system in terms of allowing in intergalactic beings from a great many other races. And the Pleiadians take great pride in this because it has diversified their star system. It has brought in new understandings and history and wisdom and creativity. And this is another reason that you see so much diversity between dimensions in the Pleiades, is that some beings are coming in and aren't ascending through the 12th dimension in Pleiades, even though they may have ascended through the 12th dimension in their own home star system, because it's a completely different experience to cherish. There are new things to learn. It's a new structure to be a part of. So every soul is choosing what they believe is best for not only their soul's evolutionary path, but also for the whole of the universe and contributing to its expansion.
Now, I could be wrong, but let me just formulate an idea here. It seems to me that many human beings who are either more self-aware or in some cases maybe more conscious don't want to be here in this earth dimension. So, and I'm assuming that at least some of those are maybe beings of a higher dimension who chose a third dimensional experience on earth at this time to have that journey, just like you're describing seventh dimensional Pleiadians would choose that journey because it's different than being in the ninth dimension. So why is it that there are so many human beings who maybe some of them are of a higher consciousness or more evolved than third dimension, suffering so much and wanting to not be here?
Well, ultimately, we could simplify this answer by saying that we believe it has to do with the idea of love. Because regardless of what dimension you are in, a soul has the ability to intersect with its own love, which is an extension of God, and enables it to have an evolutionary experience regardless of any difficulty it might face. And this is what has been taken away from you. It's the organic frequency through which you were seeded that you have been taught exists beyond. So we agree that there are many evolved and cosmically oriented souls that have chosen to come to planet Earth at this juncture, who have a remembrance of what that love feels like in their home star systems and on their home planets, and cannot rectify why they feel so alone or misunderstood in this reality. But also, we know that it's a difficult timeline. There is a remembrance of much of the history that has been traversed not only here in ancient timelines, but also what is cosmic in your history. All of that is being re-explored and expressed through your DNA and the spiral of time. So it is misunderstood, we believe, to think that you should not be here at this time and believe that you were brought here to suffer. The awakenings that humans have gone through have brought more dismay, in our opinion, because the clarity through which you are viewing what has happened over decades of time is bringing more sadness than it is evoking the courage and the ingenuity and creativity to easily shift it, which we believe is possible. We mentioned, as we were speaking of the seventh dimension, that an earthly experience is often very revered. And it is, because it is one of the slight opportunities within the universe where vibration is slowed enough to actually mold it into a physical form. And intergalactic races throughout the universe cherish those opportunities to actually assimilate into an identity and be able to use their energy to manifest something physical and tangible. Yet we know in this reality, you've been swayed from the understanding that you are creators at all. So much of this comes into play. It isn't just the cosmically evolved souls that are here that are longing for home. It's the ones who have awakened, who see the world through a very clear lens and have forgotten their ability to actually create a life that not only serves them, but makes an impact in terms of the shifts that we know Earth is capable of making, and all of you are on the trajectory of. But it is difficult for us to say whether or not that will change, because we, as the Council of Light, and many races representing this council, have gone through our own challenges, very much like you have. It might surprise those who are tuning into these transmissions that we still face challenges today. As the council, we are still in awe of things that we have not been able to fully understand about the workings of this universe. It constantly takes us by surprise, yet we have learned to garner joy from that surprise. And we think this is the easiest way for those who are struggling with wanting to leave the planet to remind their consciousness of what it's like to be in a state of flux on a planet that is moving between dimensions so quickly. There is going to be a great deal of surprise. And if we anticipate that that surprise will be to our detriment, we will continue to suffer. But if we can be more neutral in our observation, if we can pull in the energy of our higher self and our oversoul who knows these challenges have been faced in other dimensions before, we can find our peace. And that peace is perhaps one of the most powerful frequencies that lends itself to a new reality. You see, humans are here to create and to physically do things that support their joy and the movement forward of the planet. But often, those who are spiritually advanced have been taught that it is only their energy that should be capable of this. We think this also causes a great deal of suffering, because we see many who are lost between worlds. They are exploring the great expanse. They have the ability to understand what it is like in other dimensions, and they are constantly comparing that to the life that they chose, when if they would only ground into their bodies and begin to put their hands to the earth, begin to be fully present with everything in the material world that they so desired to interact with, we think great change could come.
Well, how do we resolve, in light of what you're saying, if third dimensional physical reality is revered in the universe as an experience that beings want to have? How do we resolve on Earth today, in the spiritual community in particular, there's such a strong focus toward moving away from physical, focusing more on mind and consciousness and spirituality and multidimensional interactions, and moving away from the physical interaction?
Well, it is always a soul's evolutionary path to continue to accelerate between dimensions. So I think it's natural for any soul throughout the universe, regardless of what dimension or form they find themselves in, to want to explore the next level, because it is how expansion of the universe truly takes place. But we want to define the difference between the third dimension that you believe you exist in and the third dimension that you were always meant to be a part of, because the third dimension is not an evil or dark place. And it has been assumed that what has happened here is third dimensional in nature. What has happened here could take place in any dimension throughout the galaxy. It is the suppression of your free will that has tricked you to believe that your powers only lie in non-physical. Because to be a physical being is very powerful indeed. We've talked in past transmissions, for example, about emotion. And we know emotion seems very transient. It does not seem physical at all. But if you did not have a physical body, you would not have emotion. Because emotion is what enables you to make a physical connection to the earth that you chose, but also to make a logical connection to how your soul fulfills its destiny. So if we are not in the body, we are missing out on some of the most meaningful messages that we may be attempting to retrieve from the astral. But energy and astral connection has its place in every reality. It is just that on planet Earth today, it's been a bit out of balance. Human souls have been taught only to live in their physical existence, or in a spiritual sense to evolve out of that physical existence. And neither are truly the path of salvation. What you are looking for is to balance both, to realize that you are an energetic being with the ability to manifest and to source and to create and to do all of the things that you are here to pursue, but the body is the anchor for that energy. So there are programs that take humans off track in one direction or another. Of course, it's obvious to see where you have been led only into the three-strand DNA, the physical material world, things like disease and money and possessions. While these things are very important parts of your reality, too much emphasis has been placed upon them. But we could say the same thing about spiritual teachings. And we even covered in our last gathering the idea of manifesting through mind and how this is more a reptilian ability than it is human. It is not to say, of course, that the mind is not important, but if you are not using the entire technology, the full suite of abilities in concert, you'll never truly know what you are capable of and what the universe has in store for you, which is often far better than what you have been told to manifest. So if one or the other extreme is embraced for too long, we think humans lose their way. But to balance those things, we know is not easy. So we want to simplify that as well. While you are meditating, while you are exploring these various astral abilities and gifts, take a step back in your day-to-day reality from all of the noise and all of the confusion that has been put in your schedule, things that truly don't matter, and spend some time being truly present with whatever your life entails. Not the busyness of schedule, not the work that you're here to do, but the eye-to-eye contact with another human being, the foot on the ground in nature, the smell and the taste of the nutritious dinner that you have cooked your family. This is where energy and the material plane coalesce and work together. It is where your most powerful sentient abilities will be brought to the surface, and innately you will know things without even trying. There is no true need for guidance beyond the self, other than those who are teaching you to go back inward and to find it in the semblance of physical and vibration.
Well, if material reality or material experience is valuable, then at what point, you mentioned our tendency to surround ourselves with possessions, for example, is one extreme. So, but possessions are material; they're physical things. So, what makes possessions? At what point does possessions become a bad thing? So, should we not surround our environment with possessions, or is it the idea of what the term possessions means?
We do not believe possessions are necessarily wrong, but how you think about them has been taken off track. For example, many human souls today would identify themselves with their material possessions, meaning you have been taught to evaluate your worth based upon a certain value that comes along with material wealth. And those things could include a home, for example, clothing, a car, or even societal expectations of how you should be leading your life, which are telltale signs or evidence of success. this is not how you were intended to evolve on a physical planet. It is not to say that things would not come into your reality, but every one of those things would have a purpose beyond your identity, meaning they're here to somewhat facilitate a connection to the collective. So we might say that the very term possession assumes that each one of you, as a single identity, owns things that are only yours, that no one else has any right to. And we are not saying that every human being should have the right to your possessions, but yet universal law dictates that you are existent within a source field. And if you are existent within it, that means you are a part of it. So every human being who is here is a conduit and an extension of the source field, not only for themselves, but for every other. So in tribal civilizations and in ancient civilizations, every possession had a meaning that was worthy of the individual's service or contribution to the whole. It was perhaps simply lifting their vibration in such a way that helped them to become a healer at times in which they were needed. It could be something that was necessary to be shared, whether it was wealth or food or knowledge. In fact, in many ancient civilizations and beyond the earth, the most valuable possession that beings request is knowledge. It has little to do with anything that would establish a hierarchical form of wealth. So if we go back in time and we look at some of the stories and timelines we have been reviewing, it is easy to see where material wealth was important to the gods of the time, and they were using others to accumulate that wealth, as opposed to activating the source field, which would have provided everyone equally with what they required to be a part of the collective that they had assumed to incarnate for. Releasing possessions is something we see a part of a fifth dimensional transition. And we say this not because you are meant to go without, but we think your consciousness is coming to the point where it's scrutinizing everything that it has either acquired or attempted to manifest in its life according to a divine purpose or a true intrinsic understanding of why each individual is here. It is time, we believe, to lighten the load, because all of this accumulation of material is also energy. And we could go into a great explanation about how every material possession that you take ownership of is connected to your energy field. And that means that if it doesn't have a purpose, if there is no intention to it, it's truly weighing you down in your ability to bring from the source field things that are better suited for you. If you have ever heard the phrase that prior to new incoming treasures, we must purge what no longer resonates, this is something that we believe and has been a part of many different universal belief systems throughout history. When we release what no longer serves us, we are clear conduits for the intelligence of the universe to provide what we have already dictated is necessary at any given time on our evolutionary journey.
Okay, let me use a very basic, simplistic example to articulate what I think you're saying, and you can help me clarify. So let's say, for example, I had a Rolex watch or a diamond ring, and these are both things that in our current third-dimensional society are considered measures of wealth or status or affluence. And most people who buy these things, that buy very expensive versions of these things anyway, are buying them for that status and for that sense of identity that it gives them. So does it make these types of material possessions something that takes us off track? Or let's say, on the other hand, I have a Rolex watch or a diamond ring, but it has some sort of personal meaning. It's not really a status symbol as much as perhaps I just love the way a Rolex watch looks, or maybe the diamond ring is my representation of my marriage or unity to a relationship partner, for example. Does that change the dynamics of that possession and their impact on us?
We never want to negate the idea of joy and receiving joy from a possession that has come into your life. At the same time, we ponder whether or not these things are actually leading human souls to true joy. It is typically a temporary satisfaction, in other words, than a long-standing sustainable frequency shift. And if we were to go back to ancient times, you would certainly see some of the goddesses adorned with various headdresses and even arm wraps and jewels. But these had little to do with some hierarchical status. It had more to do with the vibration and its ability to shift that individual's energy field. So everything was very purposeful in how it was adorning the body and how it was worn or brought to be a part of an individual's grouping of possessions. This today in modern times has been lost. And so we see a great deal of energy actually being wasted in creating some of these things. Again, not that joy is wasted. We know that you came to have a material experience, and some of you have dictated within your own divine plan that that material experience would come through decadent wealth. But that's only because you're repeating timelines in history that hasn't really served you or been extremely meaningful in your ascension. So a wealthy experience can actually be a highly conscious and meaningful experience when it is turned towards the collective and offered something, or offers the collective something that is truly valuable. This is where we believe the fulfillment and joy that extends beyond the moment is accessible. In addition to this, we know that where you're going, it's going to require a new type of perspective in terms of productivity and mechanics and technology. Everything that you're apt to do is going to have a purpose, either in your healing, in your wisdom or ability to access greater knowledge, or even to communicate universally. We think that is the way that you are able to shift into the fifth dimension far easier, and we don't think it will happen necessarily overnight. So do we believe that the lift of vibration from accumulating a very decadent possession is important or worthy of a soul? Well, certainly. We think that anytime you surround yourself with things that you love, you're creating an environment that contributes to a better world. What we question is whether or not the value of those items is truly worthy of you.
Now, there's a movement in recent decades, in particular in Western nations like in the United States, toward minimalism. Now, I'm wondering, is what you're talking about the move toward minimalism, or is minimalism more of a global agenda by the world leaders to have people own nothing and be happy?
There is no one within the universe that operates under the ideology of minimalism, because you are all expanding. The universe is expanding. So this very idea goes against the laws of nature. And we think, yes, it is a program designed to create more suffering. So we are not saying that you should release all of your wealth or possessions to the degree that you are uncomfortable or living a life that is below the caliber of what your human soul deserves. At the same time, we know that resources have been slighted from humanity as you have been taught to operate outside your true connection to source and have looked to others to source for you. So until that changes, you will truly not understand the definition of prosperity, because that prosperity would never come from another. And those we know who are struggling on the planet, and there are many, who do not have enough possessions or monetary resource to feed themselves, can not only be sustained through your contribution, they also must understand that they have an organic connection to the source field that they have been taught to not follow, or have been led astray of, in other words. So if all of you were operating in alignment to source, there would be no reason to minimalize anything. We think you would still have many possessions at your fingertips, material and otherwise, that would bring you great joy. It is just that those things might look a little different in the future than they do today. They would all be accentuating your health, your vibration, your attunement to the universe, your connection to each other, and also your connection to the earth.
Elaborating a little bit more on what you just mentioned about some people in the world may not have a lot of possessions or wealth or even the resources to feed themselves. Now, and it's primarily because they have a disconnection from source. But of course, I think even in Western countries, we have a disconnection from source, even though we may have more material things here. It's just a different way it expresses, right?
Yes, that is correct. And we always have to account for the great spiral of time, because until poverty, for example, is no longer a timeline that humans experience, it will continue to repeat in your potentials. That does not mean that it has to express as the poverty that you see on the planet today. You have the ability to incrementally and vibrationally adjust that timeline based on your consciousness to become whatever it is you choose. But hierarchies, we believe, is ultimately the problem. And we know that when we say this word, many refer to a small number of human beings on top who are making the decisions and who own everything on planet Earth. And certainly that is true. But we want to allude more to an energetic type of hierarchy that humans have been brought up in that sustains certain belief systems. In other words, you have been taught at a very young age, whether it's through schooling or through your parents, that certain facets of humanity or the collective are not as worthy as others. They have faced certain things in their history or in their past that has slighted them from maintaining a certain level of wealth or abundance. And these programs and beliefs are causing some of the biggest problems, we believe, especially in those who are experiencing the poverty, because as these stories continue to spiral through the DNA and through multiple generations, they're continuing to weaken groups of humans that truly believe that they are not worthy or capable of receiving the same amount of abundance or source that others do. Now, those who have come into very wealthy lives, who have been somewhat abundant from a very early age, may have chosen that as a part of their soul's expression, because there are timelines throughout history of the very same nature. But also we see there is still hierarchy going on here. These souls have learned to work against universal law, which is meant to be very collective, to hoard resources from others. It does not mean they are doing so with neglect or through ego. It has just been entrained within the human mind that competition exists. And because that competition exists, there are certain things we must do in order to keep resources for ourselves. Now, ultimately, if everyone was working through the source field, there would be no competition whatsoever. The very idea that competition exists is a falsehood in your reality. It's, again, been programmed into the minds of humans to believe that they must work hard in order to achieve what they have in their physical life, when in fact, everyone is meant to receive from a cosmic inheritance and collective pool exactly what is necessary to benefit themselves and the earth. So prior to leaving this incarnation, regardless of how much money you have acquired or how many possessions you have at your fingertips, the most important thing you will evaluate is whether or not you left behind something meaningful. And this is not even a tangible physical thing we are speaking of. We're talking about a legacy in terms of your ability to be kind and compassionate and present with others and sharing what is necessary for others to receive. Ultimately, you are all here expressing source through you. So until the fifth dimension fully arrives and these hierarchies come down, we think that charitable contributions that you're making beyond yourself are going to continue to be a very important thing. But even here, you must be wary because there is a great deal of negative influence even in these sectors. So we're not speaking of great organizations that come together to support humans through government influence. We're speaking about your relationship that is forged with the neighbor. We're speaking of your presence on the street with another who may be in need. These are the very small acts that we believe will sustain you as you walk through this transitional period.
Well, by this measure, would it be also fair to say that the world leaders and billionaires who have all the money and power and control everything are just as much disconnected from source as people who are living in poverty, because they're depending on the rest of us to provide them with their source?
Well, they have made you their source. So you are being sourced from those in power, and it is not just in a physical sense. As we have pointed out, there is the constant draw of energy that many of those in power, even who are hybrids, for example, are feeding upon. So the entire mechanism of sourcing and manifesting on planet Earth has somewhat been turned upside down and hijacked by a small number of humans who have trained those beyond them to believe that they must work in order to receive. But through that work, there are only a slight few that are benefiting.
So are methods and practices such as Kabbalah designed for that purpose? I mean, does Kabbalah, for example, serve any beneficial purpose for humanity, or was it created in order for a few to use these methods to siphon the energy from everyone else?
Well, this and many others. We can't say there is only one area of focus or practice. We'll say, unfortunately, there have been many throughout time that have sprung up that continue to rage on planet Earth. At the same time, we cannot negate the understanding of the DNA, because there is a force that is here that has focused on bringing human DNA into its most restricted and weakest point. And because of that, there's no ability to truly see some of these negative programs and mind traps, we believe, that exist in broad daylight, that are constantly being used to siphon this energy. In fact, those who are orchestrating these events have been trained at a very early age and understand the importance of energy, but they are not necessarily using too much of their physical focus either, which we have already mentioned is and extreme that takes them out of balance. So anyone who is here, regardless of whether they are the ones enslaved or the ones doing the enslaving, are out of alignment with not only source, but their organic and true evolutionary path. And that will weaken every being that is a part of it.
Okay, I guess what I want to know in particular, I understand there are probably many different kinds of teachings, which we'll touch on in future conversations, but the Kabbalah, from my understanding, originated as different parts of knowledge that developed in the Mesopotamian area, perhaps from Anunnaki influence or the fallen angels. Am I correct so far in that understanding that that's where it comes from?
Yes, this is a strong influence that is continued on today.
So does the Kabbalah serve any positive practical purpose for human development and advancement, or has it been developed for the few to control the many?
It was not developed for this purpose, but has been taken out of context and shifted, we might say, in order to benefit the few and slight the many.
So is there any benefit for the average person to study the Kabbalah, or is it just for that purpose?
In its study, you unfortunately might miss out on some of the more beneficial aspects of these practices because they have been hidden through time, although we know there are many who are oracles, for example, who have the ability to go into the Akashic records and retrieve these lost teachings or components of the practice. It's somewhat like focusing on a symbol. It is sometimes holding the influence of many different timelines and beings who have focused upon it. And regardless of how you use it, you will intersect with that influence, which may not be in your highest and best interest. And this is what we think about the Kabbalah, for example. There are very intriguing, we'll say, and powerful translations of universal law that are beneficial for some humans who are curious to understand. Do we think that negates the power of it being used in opposition to the human collective? That we think remains to be seen because its power has been focused for so long in the, we'll say, darker aspects of its power that it would be difficult for you to fully and truly reverse over time.
Are any of these lost teachings particularly found in the Zohar, or is the Zohar primarily more of the darker teachings?
We don't see these so much as dark. The teachings that we speak of, some of which are there, are more a neutral type of translation of these practices that can be looked at as a bridge to connect them back to their origins.
Okay, I'd like to return to our initial conversation, which was the Dolmens. We've gone quite a range of different topics here, but one of the things we discussed was Pleiadians often are in the seventh dimension. Now, were the Dolmens that are around different parts of the Earth, including the ones in Russia that I mentioned earlier, were they primarily used by Pleiadians or a variety of different kinds of seventh dimensional beings?
This was a group of Pleiadian hybrids, but not necessarily identifying with the Pleiadian star system. The majority of these structures are tied to these beings.
Okay, so they were all Pleiadian. So dolmens even found in the United States, for example, would also be Pleiadian origin.
Not necessarily. We see a little difference here in some of these structures relating more to those who would be considered descendants of those seen as the ancestors of the Anunnaki, which are tall whites.
So what is the commonality then? Are dolmens primarily a seventh dimensional technology or structure, or are there certain kinds of races that would have used them?
Not in every case. What you are looking at here is the housing or the structure of an energy field or a magnetic field that we have defined as a portal that holds information, that is able to sustain beings that arrive on the planet who are not intending to move back through an original portal connected to the earth.
And why would, let's say, an Anunnaki being choose to use a dolmen as a portal versus the Anunnaki portals that the other Anunnakis used?
It truly depends upon the timeline and the dimension in which these were created. And what you must keep in mind, as we've mentioned before, is many of the portals that connected Earth to the universal grid had been assumed by those that were using very malevolent technologies to do research, for example, or to observe. So there were some that would not have preferred to bring their energy through those portals, even if they were Anunnaki at the time. Also, there was such a split in timelines that those that came may not have wanted to associate with their own race that may have taken on a malevolent type of manifestation.
All right, so we have these dolmens that are portals, and they're housing this technology. And so let's say a Pleiadian or an Anunnaki uses one of these dolmens to experience this reality. And you said in some cases they would have been able to leave that dolmen to explore the physical earth and return to it to essentially recharge or reconnect. Am I on the right track so far?
Yes, you can think of it as a home base on Earth.
And why the difference in entryways? For example, some have perfectly circular entryways, which typically you wouldn't expect to see, like a tall human structure being wanting to use as an exit point, versus some that have actual doorway looking entry points. Was it the different kinds of shape shifting that they were doing into different beings when they exited, or were they just simply viewports to see outside?
They weren't necessarily doorways at all. Many of these were aligning with specific meridians or even grid points from the Earth to their homes planets, not necessarily for observation at all. And yes, certainly these beings were hybrids. They were shape-shifting. They were using this technology to recharge their energy, to download information and knowledge, and sometimes to even send it back to their home planets. So these various cutouts, we'll call them, had more to do with the alignment of a specific planet or heavenly body than they truly did access to the energy that was inside.
What's the difference between a perfectly circular opening versus one that's rectangular?
It was simply the preference of those who were designing the structure. We do not necessarily see that the beings had to fit in them so much, because yes, they were using more of their energy and light than they were form. To have to carve out a doorway that would accommodate them as a structure would not have been necessary. But sometimes they were disguised as well. We want to reiterate that some of the beings who came to planet Earth, who may have been using these structures, attempted to make them seem as if they would have been accepted in a more earthly fashion, either as a place of solace for a regular human being or something that an animal may reside in.
Do these dolmens that still exist on the planet, at least the ones that are not weathered to a significant degree to where they're deteriorated substantially, but the ones that still seem to retain some of their structure and design, would they still be able to serve the same purpose today as they did when they were originally created?
Well, the Earth is a very different planet today than it was when many of these were created. And keep in mind, these were advanced beings. These locations were chosen because there was the perfect combination of elemental energy beneath the Earth, or some very specific direction or alignment to energy coming beyond the Earth, which may not line up as perfectly today as it would have in the time that they were constructed. Yet, we do believe that some who are sensitive, empaths or telepathic, would be able to still feel the residual energy of the technology that was left behind, not in all cases.
So is there any benefit for human beings tend to like to sit inside of ancient structures and experience things? Is there any benefit, with the exception of, you said, very sensitive people, to sit inside of a dolmen today? And what would that be to connect to that energy that was there once, if it's not there anymore?
These are very different than portals. So when we speak of a pyramid, for example, we do consider a pyramid constructed as a portal, meaning it is holding an unbroken connection in the 369 to the universe. And because of that, even if there have been shifts in the portal or the construction of the pyramid itself, humans that still enter these areas today could be transformed based upon the codes and the frequencies that were embedded within the structure itself. These were designed more for the beings that would inhabit the earth as opposed for humans. They were not necessarily healing chambers that humans would benefit from. However, keep in mind that they did contain the possibility of astral travel, meaning a connection could be made beyond the earth to a specific race or home planet. And because of this, a human could enter these facilities and perhaps make a channeled connection or download information that would be suitable or helpful to them. Keep in mind, we just had a discussion about plasma. Anytime that you're intersecting with a creation from an extra dimensional being, whether it's a field, a portal, a technology, your plasma will forever be changed. And that isn't necessarily negative. Plasma is intergalactic, it's interdimensional. It will store any information from the experience that is had and hold it in weight until there is a vibrational match. So, to give you a very simple example, a human could enter one of these fields or structures today, receive a download into their plasma about the beings who were there, their history, and some of the experiences they had on planet Earth, but not detect that information until many months later or even years later when they are having a meditative experience and there's a reason for them to understand it, you see. So while we don't think they're as beneficial as other portals on planet Earth, we still think that some influence could be made.
Okay, you started out by saying these are not portals, meaning that dolmens are not portals, but pyramids are portals. Can you clarify that?
Yes. When we speak of a portal, we are using a very all-encompassing term to look at how energy flows on a physical planet. What a portal is doing is it's opening up a window in time, but that window of time is defined by the consciousness of the technology within which it is sustained. This is why pyramids and temples were later built around very sensitive power points considered to be portals. They were directing the energy in a very specific way. It's easy to see how the simplicity of the housing of what you are considering simply holding the energy but not necessarily programming it. So this would be the difference. We're trying to put a word or a term to it. In other words, it's a field, certainly. You could call it a magnetic field through which communication can be exchanged, but not necessarily for or with human beings, only for those within which the technology was constructed.
All right, let me just sort of review what you're saying, make sure I understand. So the dolmens were built by beings. I don't know if I clarified this, but was it a particular range of dimensional beings, like seventh dimensional, who used dolmens? Maybe you answered that question already. Can you clarify? Or was it a variety of different dimensional beings?
So the dolmens are essentially a sixth to seventh dimensional manifestation or construction, at least in the time in which they were constructed.
Okay. So the dolmens today, if we were to sit inside them and meditate or whatever, they don't really serve a purpose in our own advancement or ascension, but they may serve a purpose for us to connect with the beings or even the collective or the dimension that originally manifested their technology within the dolmen. Am I correct?
This is correct. Yes.
Okay. Whereas using a pyramid, or let's say some of the Egyptian pyramids, they are, because they're built on specific ley lines and so on, they can still be used today for our spiritual advancement as well.
Yes. Yes. And we want to help you envision the difference here, especially as we use the terminology portal and how it might function if you are to look at a pyramid and how it is directing the energy. Even though there might be a very significant power point or meridian crossing beneath that is creating a portal, the energy of that portal is being programmed, we'll say, via the structure that is created around it. In a dolmen, you do not see the elaborate programming of the energy that exists within it, because the energy is so specific to something that was needed. In other words, it doesn't have to be programmed to be anything other than what it is. So this is the slight difference in these two structures.
Okay, moving on to a slightly different form of ancient architecture. There are many ancient Buddhist monasteries, for example, located all over the world, primarily in the Asian area, that are located on very high mountaintops and extremely hard to get to from the ground level. Many people today do go on these long-term pilgrimages to these monasteries that are located in these distant places. And in many cases also, these ancient that are used for monasteries today, maybe they weren't originally, are carved right into the mountains and in very precise lines, often right angle lines and smooth surfaces that could not really even be achieved today. Of course, many archaeologists believe that they were done with hammers and chisels, but would these, when we see these structures that are carved inside of mountains, especially in very high places that human beings can't easily get to, would these have been reptilian influence or locations?
But yes, they would have been reptilian influence, and much of their construction organized from within the inner earth, surprisingly, even though they are found in very high places. We have explained the idea of ships using various templates and sound and light through the template to change the content of rock and granite and crystal. This is similar in that the inner earth beings were accessing very sensitive areas to vibrate and to have a similar result, meaning the template wasn't put in place via a ship. It was imagined and envisioned by those that were beneath the ground, coming together as a collective and understanding how to create a frequency field that would emanate in a template itself and showing itself in a material form. This did not happen immediately. It was a constant progress and process by those who were focused upon it. Even at times, using the frequency of water and sending it upward into the caverns of the mountain to clear out any residue that may have been left over as the material of the earth transformed.
Is this why that many of these ancient sites that are located in these places ended up being used as Buddhist monasteries or Tibetan monasteries, for example, teaching these mind-based teachings from ancient times, that because of the reptilian origins of that location?
Well, there is a long lineage here of those considered enlightened reptilians who chose these locations not only because it brought them great solace, but also because of the frequency that they would elicit, meaning they were not only carved in perfect symmetry in order to accentuate certain activities like meditation and chants, but also in harmony with the various earth elements to sustain those who were existing within them. Because the reptilians as shapeshifters were highly advanced in using their own internal elements to change realities. And this took a great deal of their non-physical energy on an earth plane, very much like we have spoken of ETs coming to the earth and rejuvenating themselves within their own energy field. This is similar to what you may see happening in these structures very early on.
Nowadays, many of these places I mentioned are used as temples for spiritual worship or even for monks to reside in their own practices. But were they originally used in that way by the reptilians who created them, or were they just simply places where they lived?
Both. They were places of practice as well as living quarters. They also contained hidden passageways into the inner earth, which is why they were held so sacred and very revered. These passageways were not only for entry into the inner earth to intersect with those of their same lineage, but also brought inner earth energies to the surface, which are very valuable in terms of restoration and healing.
In 1909, there was a gentleman by the name of G.E. Kincaid who worked for the Smithsonian Institute, and there was an article in the Arizona Gazette in the United States and that talked about this expedition that he went on in the Grand Canyon, and that he found this entryway into an inner earth cave system that went almost a mile, that he, at least the portion that he explored. And at the beginning of the entryway, there are what appeared to him to be Egyptian hieroglyphs. And in the very early part of this cave, there was what he described as a Buddhist statue of some sort in a meditative position, and many caskets of all male beings, although there's no ability for people to visit there today because the Smithsonian has blocked off access, or is not, where it's considered to be illegal to visit this location. So we don't really know. And of course, the whole story was later dropped, and the Smithsonian says that they have no records of it. Now, is it fair to assume that because this was a cave system and there was a Buddhist statue at the beginning, that this was also a reptilian environment that they created?
Well, we consider the Grand Canyon to be an ancient city that has been hidden from you, and of course, over decades of time has shifted in terms of its original appearance, yet so potent in its energy. And in these underground tunnels and caverns, not only were there passageways beneath the earth to cities that could be accessed and were mostly reptilian, there were also healing chambers that were later built in this area because of the potent energies that would surge from the inner earth. Many came, of course, to study, not only under the more enlightened reptilians of the age, but the intergalactic masters who would appear before their very eyes, who were known, very well known, to share wisdom here, because this region, we'll call it, is very much like a stargate, and it begs the question. We know what a stargate is, and it's very easily described as a PowerPoint similar to a portal, except that it runs parallel or very close connected to Gaia's own beating heart, in that a specific frequency exists that is a passageway to other worlds. And it is not just for communication necessarily, but entire historic timelines of Akashic relevance are able to be accessed and downloaded in these areas in particular. Great masters would come and code them or leave behind their entire legacies to assist future generations. And of course, this is not the only location in which much of this happened, but it's inevitable that you would find reptilians in areas like this, not only because of the access to the inner earth, but especially because of the resonance that would echo through these various mountainous chambers, as well as coming up through the earth in such a way that it would accentuate vibration.
Now, this gentleman, G. Kincaid, mentioned that they went far into this cave system, and there was a room that they didn't explore because with all the lighting that they brought with them, the more lighting that they used, the darker the room became. These are his actual words. And that the room had a deadly, snaky smell. So using that terminology, what was he describing exactly that room contained?
Well, much later, after these areas had been exposed, different beings, even reptilian hybrids, began to inhabit them. So they were not always used for healing or in the highest light or vibration that they were founded in other words. Now, because these chambers were so potent with energy, they were not always used to sustain others, but to channel energy for an individual to become powerful. So what you are sensing in this chamber is the residue perhaps left over of those more malevolent in their focus, channeling energy to their greatest expansion and still remaining in this area. It is not, again, unusual for the spirits of those who have passed on to remain in inner earth, especially caverns or tunnels, because it is very much like a magnet that holds on to their life force. This cavern you speak of, or this area, we'll call it, of the tunnel, it does not respond to light, not only because of the dark residues here, but it was also meant to remain as dark as possible, because remember, the reptilians were using caves to find solace or silence. They were very adept at focusing the mind and training the mind to immediately manifest. And they were doing this on a physical planet mostly because they were reorienting that mind and their abilities to a different material density. And it took longer periods of time for them to sustain and channel that energy through the mind in a physical form than it did well beyond the earth.
What is the motivation? So are you saying at that time that this individual was researching this location were there any reptilians in physical form that were still there, or was it just a residue left over?
We're speaking more in spirit form than in physical.
Okay. What's the motivation of institutions like the Smithsonian to hide all this knowledge and to prevent people from going to these locations? Is it because they're afraid it's going to change the narrative of how human beings came into being, which may lose some of the power of the world leaders? Or is it they just don't want us to have access to these PowerPoints or portals on the planet?
Well, we believe in general in this circumstance, there is an undeniable effort to keep the history of the reptilians on planet Earth hidden because many would make a logical connection, we believe, between the families who are still here as a part of that legacy that are focused on the enslavement of the human collective and what has happened in these various locations. Also, there are valuable transmissions that have been left behind, both in archaic writings that have been carved on various cave walls, as well as amulets and technologies, for example, that have been confiscated, some of which they cannot yet take possession of because the frequency is so strong and so high that they have not yet figured out, without harm to their own bodies, how to remove and research these things. So there is a lot of protection in these sensitive areas and hiding of this knowledge because those that fund, for example, organizations like the Smithsonian are behind much of what we've been talking about in our various transmissions. They are keeping this knowledge in order to empower themselves.
Is there any benefit for human beings to go into any cave systems where some of this ancient archaeological artifacts still exist, indicating that there was a civilization? So, for example, taking the Grand Canyon as an example, the ones we're just discussing, would there be any advantage or benefit to human beings to be in that environment today?
Well, we see the Grand Canyon as a frequency field, in other words. So anyone who visits it is receiving valuable frequencies from deep within the earth that are transformative in nature. It does not mean that every soul is open to receiving and integrating those frequencies for the benefit of their soul's evolution. So consciousness and awakening are always a factor. It is just like someone who could visit a pyramid in Egypt, but be solely interested in the history and not the energetic power or technology that is available to them as an ascendant soul. This is what happens in every location on the earth in which there is powerful energy. Yet, you're speaking about entering the inner earth or these caves that have been left behind. And we're cautious about this because, as we've mentioned, there have been a great many changes. The original beings who were more loving and benevolent, who inhabited these areas and perhaps even created them, were displaced at times by more malevolent beings that may have shifted them slightly for their own use, and some of that influence still remains. And even this explorer that you bring to our attention was entering another dimension when he had this experience. So in these, we'll say, frequency fields, we'll call it, many different dimensions exist. And if you were to enter a certain area of the Great Canyon, the Grand Canyon, you may find yourself in a completely different dimension than you were literally 5 miles before. This is constantly shifting as well. So to have an extra dimensional experience, a vivid and physical experience of an underground cavern that leads to the inner earth would require a bit of advancement in terms of your plasma and light body, as well as some pre-preparation. And it's not to say that this event did not take the explorer by surprise. Many are here and do not have any idea that they have these advanced abilities at their disposal and will awaken to them in the most surprising of ways.
You mentioned that the Grand Canyon in particular was a very advanced area in ancient times. Was this primarily reptilian, considering they were all cave systems, or was it by other beings also?
It was founded with reptilian influence, yet it was not exclusive to these beings, meaning there were many others that came to explore and to enter this reality. There are even ships that have landed in this area, and intergalactic beings have done research here because of all the areas on planet Earth. This is a very rare opportunity, we believe, to explore the culmination of many different cosmic elements and minerals that came together at the very beginning of time to form the Earth. And there are many who are observing how these cosmic entities have evolved and hybridized. So this still happens very often today, even though it's no longer looked at as an active city or gathering place for these beings. Intergalactics do still come and take samples and observe and measure frequencies because it is offering a great deal of information about how the inner earth is shifting and giving intergalactic collectives insight into how to assist humans within the ascension timeline.
In Turkey, there is an underground cave system that was found in recent decades that goes down many levels, and it's referred to as Derinkuyu, and it's believed that, at least by archaeologists and researchers, that human beings actually lived in this cave system. But should we, during the Great Flood, or to escape the flood, or the Ice Age, or some other mainstream concept today, should we assume that when we see elaborate cave systems that are that intricate and large, that they were primarily reptilian in origin, or would human beings have lived in an underground location like that?
Well, there is almost always reptilian influence here in terms of the underground caves, especially if they're very elaborate as this one in nature. It does not mean, however, that human beings were not led into them at some point in time, either to chant and to study and to learn from these enlightened beings, or to escape various cataclysms. The reptilians were very heart-centered, some of them at the very beginning of time. They were very clear that they wanted to serve the humans who were here, knowing, of course, that the possibility of them being taken off path was so great, even through their own, in the influence of their own race. At times, what we notice is humans of certain ancient civilizations were following the insights of these reptilian leaders so closely that they became hybridized themselves, meaning they took on more of a reptilian type of quality than they did human, which would predispose them to living within these areas.
Now, many of these that we've discussed today in previous conversations, such as what are used for monasteries today, that are very high up and nearly impossible to get to by human beings, and even the cave systems in the Grand Canyon, the researchers talk about how it was almost impossible to reach them. So these are not easily accessible by human beings. Now, is it fair to assume, based on our conversations thus far, that the reptilians, one of the reasons they position themselves in such distant places or inside the ground was to not intermix with the human genetic by proximity, as in order to avoid their own genetics becoming altered?
Yes, both of those reasons are in fact true. There was concern, of course, to not take the true evolutionary path of the new humans off course, but also They knew that they were not in the strongest structure to be present on a physical planet. And any type of influence from either a physical being or even another hybrid could take their energy structure out of harmony. And this is often why the inner Earth was preferred, because even though it was a planet very different from the one that they had known, the inner Earth did provide a great deal of energy and frequency that was suitable for their constant rejuvenation, we might say, or ability to thrive in a material environment. Even if we look at the density of the inner Earth, and we're not speaking here of energetic density that is accumulated via karma, we're speaking of dense material, like the combination of rock and molten clay and in various components like this, it suited them very well in terms of resonance. Not because they are lower vibrational beings, but because they thrive in dense environments where they are able to shapeshift and have no barrier in terms of this kind of a field, in other words. So there were many different advantages to them remaining in close proximity to Gaia's inner meridians and channels.
Well, if there was a concern over their genetics becoming altered by proximity, by physical proximity to human beings, then why did some of the more enlightened ones choose to teach human beings to evolve? Was that purely out of a self-interest to alter human genetics to become more reptilian so that the reptilians could coexist, or did they have some other motivation?
Well, some of this is true, and it is dependent upon the teacher, of course, and the timeline that you are referring to. But certainly at some point in their evolution, even the most loving reptilians understood that to make this planet their own or to be here of service, they must somehow support the human collective in becoming more like them. It's innate in every being throughout the universe to believe that their reality is the one that is best suited for another. And this, of course, took place in various circumstances. But beyond this, imagine that to hybridize with the human race in a more neutral state was what they were aiming for. Not that one group of beings or the other would become more influenced in any direction, but together they could find some semblance of peace in becoming more like each other, or even birthing, we might say, a new hybrid race, which was never the intention of the original seeders, but certainly was carried out in the intentions of those more enlightened reptilians who found themselves here and knew that they could be of support at the same time, benefit themselves as well as the human race.
We're going to stop there for today, and we'll pick up next time. Thank you, Micheila.
All right.
And I hope you all enjoyed the show today. Thank you again, and we'll be back in another week with another Awake and Empowered podcast. So if you are seeing any ads on YouTube or any other platform, you can also watch us on Rumble or various podcast platforms like Spotify and iTunes as well. So thank you again, and we'll see you next week.